In an environment where cybercrime, terrorism and geopolitical tensions pose ever-evolving threats, building our security capability is an important strategic priority. With more than 30 years senior management experience, this next speaker serves on a number of security industry advisory groups and is committed to raising professional standards within the industry. Would you please welcome the CEO of ASIAL, Bryan Caires.
Thank you, Tracy. And thank you for having me again. Picking up on, I suppose, some of the themes of Justine's presentation, security personnel have been around, I think, since the ancient pharaohs and the ancient Romans. They had private security. So it's an industry that's been around a very long time. And I just wanted to touch on a few things to give some context to the environment that we're in currently. And some of the issues, again, they've been touched on already with John's presentation. But if you look at the security industry today, I think it's probably one of the biggest post-war, Second World War growths. We've now got almost 30 million private security personnel around the world. Revenues are in excess of 500 billion. So it is a significant industry. You've got some of the major international players employing over 800,000 personnel. So they are large and significant operations. Here in Australia, we have just over 200,000 licensed security personnel and assisting staff. We have about $12.5 billion in industry turnover. And I think it's interesting, if you look over the last 5 years, so even during the pandemic, individual security license numbers grew by about just over 10%. So we're now up to 162,000 licensed security personnel. To give some perspective, if you go back to the mid-90s, there were about 37,000 private security personnel. So based on the numbers that we are seeing now, within the next 4 to 5 years, we'll be in excess of 200,000 licensed security personnel across Australia. And if you look at the split, New South Wales accounts for the biggest chunk, about 35%. So there's just under 60-odd thousand licensed security personnel within New South Wales, and then you've got a breakdown. You can see it on the screen there with Victoria, WA and Queensland in around 20 to 25, 30,000 personnel. Interestingly, if you also look at the number of security providers, that has also risen during the pandemic. It's risen by about 20%. So now there's over 13,000 private security companies out there that are providing security services. So it's an industry that has grown. So I think, and if you look, what's interesting, if you look at the split with of the firm license holders, 50% are based in New South Wales, which is an interesting. It may be the regulatory model is more rigorous in New South Wales, but certainly 50% of all security license holders are domiciled in New South Wales. To put all these numbers into perspective, so we've got a workforce of about 300,000 security personnel, if you use that a broad definition, and that includes about 65,000 police, just under 90,000 defence forces, which includes the reservists, and we've got basically 51% of that number is the private security sector. So it's not a small number, and that number will continue to grow. As I say, it'll be, I think it'll be probably 50 to 55% in the next 5 years. So it is a significant part of the framework of our national security mix, so we need to get it right. And I think it's also important to understand that security, for many people, is a one-dimensional industry. It's the security officers and security personnel you see, but it is not. It is much more than that. That is a significant part of the industry, but you've also got the electronics, and you just have to go downstairs to the exhibition to see how complex and how sophisticated that sector is. And every single area of the economy relies on the services the industry provides. So we've got the domains of physical security, which is obviously the bollards, boom gates, locks. You've also got electronic, so the CCTV, biometrics, access control, the robotics, drones that you're now seeing. We've got protective. Obviously, there's still humans out there patrolling, concierge, aviation screening. And then you've also got the cyber sector, which is another growing part of this overall industry in terms of providing security to business and government and residential customers. So again, if you just travel around the country, you are more likely to engage or interact with private security personnel than you are with law enforcement, whether you're getting on a plane, whether you're going to a shopping centre, whether you're going to a corporate headquarters. Most of the military bases around the country are private security on the perimeter. If you go to a number of the police headquarters, it's going to be a private security officer that meets you. Wherever you go, private security is pretty well omnipresent. So it's in every single sector, from hospitals, transport, you name it, security is there. So it's a critical part, and it has come up already. But in 2008, COAG agreed that it would make sense that we have consistent national regulatory standards. Sadly, we're now 16 odd years later, and we still have a patchwork of industry regulation, which creates problems. So, at the moment we've got issues, for example, with individual license holders going down to the ACT to get their license because it's a lot easier, and there are different controls in place in that territory. And then they all live in New South Wales. Then they all come back up to New South Wales to work through mutual recognition, because that's where they want to work, not the ACT. So what we see is these inconsistencies between jurisdictions are creating problems because they all have different probity and eligibility requirements. So for us, that creates an uneven playing field, which creates a number of problems for operators, but also it reduces the quality overall of the industry. So from an ASIAL perspective, it's certainly something that we believe is, we think it's quite logical that we have a nationally consistent standard for all operators. We don't think backpackers should be able to obtain a security license. We think if we want genuine professionals standing outside major bits of infrastructure, we want them to be people who we know what their background is, making sure that they are fit and proper persons, and they are professional. So for us, there are some inconsistencies. Now, it is one thing to criticise. It's another thing to try and come up with a solution to affect change. So, what we have done, and it's been alluded to, is we've done what we called a model private security act. So the aim would be to have model federal legislation that is administered by the various state and territories, so they do not lose control, which I think is an issue that a lot of them worry about, losing control. But what we would like to see is national regulatory standards, which basically set the standards of behaviour and service delivery to ensure that we get more consistent delivery outcomes across the whole country. It should not be dependent on what state you're in. It should be the same everywhere. And part of that is making sure that to get into the industry, you have to meet the same criteria. At the moment, it is different. Interestingly, at the moment, we managed to achieve, it took a long time, but we now have consistent training competencies, which took us a while to get in place, but now all the jurisdictions have agreed to that. And yet you can do the same training competencies, but get a different license class depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So for some reason, some issue under a general security officer license, some call it a crowd control license. So again, part of our solution is to have a consistent use of terminology and consistent license classes across all jurisdictions. And again, it comes back to that, the other issues of probity is to make sure that everybody meets the same probity standards across all jurisdictions. We would also like to see a national register of security personnel. At the moment, operators have to go into databases. If you're a provider wanting to check that someone is legit, you have to go in one by one, and some jurisdictions have a PDF that you need to go through manually and check against the PDF. We would like to see a single sort of source of truth where you have a national security register where people can put in place an API so they can automatically check every day that any employee they have is currently licensed. And it's all doable, but we just need to get there. We'd also like to see more effective compliance and enforcement. We've got a lot of regulatory requirements in place, but depending on the jurisdiction, I would say the level of enforcement and compliance is weak. So you then allow people to get away with things they shouldn't get away with. So we'd like to see that to become standardized across all jurisdictions. Also, by having consistent licensing requirements, there is a concept called automatic mutual recognition, which came into force about 2 years ago for licensed classes. But I think it's New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and Western Australia have sought exemptions from the automatic mutual recognition on the grounds of public safety. So basically what they're saying is that we don't trust the other jurisdictions to do it automatically, so we will still do our checks, right? So to me, that means there's distrust between jurisdictions about the levels of probity or whatever they're doing. So surely that is a vulnerability that needs to be addressed. So we would like to see consistent license classes, which then means when you have some of these major events and you do need to move personnel between jurisdictions, you can move people more freely, and employees can move to a major event that may be happening in another state or territory. The harmonised training, we've got the similar or consistent training competencies, but in each jurisdiction there are different methodologies to implement that. Some are more rigorous. So you may be getting 2 to 3 weeks worth of training for an individual to enter the industry, whereas others you can do it in 2 days and you somehow get the same license. So again, that's not adequate, and we need to get that fixed. I think also, particularly for the national operators, they have 8 compliance regimes to comply with, which is very complicated and it creates a lot of red tape. So for particularly the larger players who have to try and comply, it is quite difficult. To deliver the same service, they're having to meet different requirements depending on what jurisdiction they're in. I think hand in hand with this also is, and it's been touched upon also, is procurement, particularly the protective services side. There has been very much a race to the bottom mentality. Is if you get it cheap, try and get it cheaper. If you want quality, it does come at a premium. So I think you need to look at security ideally as a business enabler. It's not just a dead cost. If you get it wrong, as I think Tracy mentioned, it can damage your brand and your reputation irreparably. So from an industry point of view, we are pushing for standards to be raised, but with higher standards and higher quality, you need to be able to procure security at a rate that is sustainable. And to avoid that sort of race to the bottom mentality, you've got to reward quality. Some of you may have seen the ANZ CTC put out some procurement guidelines, which we contributed towards. But again, it just sets some basic principles when you are procuring security to make sure you go through a thorough process of checking the provider, making sure that they have the skills and the abilities to deliver what you ask them to deliver. And it's not just purely about price, it's about capability, because if they get it wrong, it's not good for anyone. So if you haven't seen that document, it's on the National Security website, and it has some very helpful information in terms of the procurement side. So I think from our point of view, we have, if you just look over the next 10 years, there are a number of substantial events coming our way. The Rugby World Cup, there's, I think, the Asian Women's Cup, there's a whole stack, and obviously the big one, which is looming in 2032, is the Brisbane Olympics, which will be a significant security undertaking. We need to start thinking about getting these nationally consistent licensing measures in place. And we have called for many years. I think our position has been, was first in terms of getting national consistency goes back 25 years. We believe it is logical. So we are calling on Home Affairs Minister Burke to try and show some leadership. I know it's not in their jurisdiction. They don't regulate security in each jurisdiction, but we do need some federal government leadership to be able to get to the outcome. Because if you look at those numbers where we've got 51% of security personnel in Australia, and that will increase, and you look at all the electronic equipment, and one of the elephants in the room at the moment is we regulate protective security, we regulate electronic security, we regulate physical security, but there's this elephant in the room, which is cyber. completely unregulated. And that's only growing. So from an industry point of view, we want to make sure that we have a professional industry, one that is capable of meeting the demands that continue to grow. But at the moment, because of that inconsistent approach between jurisdictions, we have varying standards, which is not, I don't think it's good for the industry, but it's certainly not good for the users, and it's not good for the country as a whole. So I think what we are hoping to see in the next 12 to 18 months is finally some action. The fact that COAG thought it was a good idea. I know these things are difficult, but because it's difficult doesn't mean you don't try. We have to have a go at trying to get we had the same view when we were looking at the security training competencies, that they were very difficult to get agreement between jurisdictions, but we did get there in the end. So I think we need some federal government leadership, because it will not happen from the states. So from our point of view, many of you out there are users. You can also drive change. We will continue to push for higher regulatory standards, but we need you as users to also advocate for better. And hopefully we'll get there in the end. But we will not give up. But as I say, it's taken 25 years so far, but we hope to get there eventually. But I think the Olympics for us may well be the catalyst to focus attention, because if we get that wrong, we'll get it wrong on a global scale. So we do not want to get it wrong. So I'll leave it there.
Bryan, thank you so much for that powerful call to action. We have time for one question, and an excellent one has come in on the app. Why do you think there's hesitation to the national licensing from government?
I think because nobody wants to take ownership for it. So we've been raising, for example, with the cyber sphere, probably for 10 years with the state and territory regulators. They all realise it's an important thing, but they all look at it and say, geez, where do we start? This is going to be really hard. It's not our responsibility, so let's just leave that one. And if you leave it, it just continues to morph and it'll get bigger and bigger. So I think there's a reluctance for, particularly at the federal level, and it's been going for decades, to take leadership. Because the states, I think, will come. We speak to all the regulators in each state, and broadly they think it's a good idea, but none of them wants to be the one that leads it. And if New South Wales leads it, all the other jurisdictions think New South Wales is trying to bully them into their particular model. So we need someone to steward them into the right direction, because I think it's in the best interest, genuinely, of the industry, but I think it's in the best interest of the country as a whole that we get this right, and we get it right soon, not in 20 years or after a catastrophic event.
Thank you so much for your eloquence and your advocacy. Please thank Bryan Caires.